resource, reduce its impacts, and deliver a clean ocean for us all. And as consumers, we all have an important role to play over the next 10 years to beat marine pollution. In the ocean we want, we embrace habits of buying and consuming that help keep our ocean clean and healthy. Are you up to meeting this Ocean Decade Challenge? Join us today.
Ocean Decade Challenge number 2, protect and restore ecosystems and biodiversity. How do we move from the ocean we have to the ocean we want? Until recently, marine ecosystems were largely untouched and teeming with rich biodiversity. Yet something has changed over the last 50 years. Coral reefs, top ocean predators, and some of our last pristine marine ecosystems are vanishing. How much more damage must occur before we take action? Healthy marine ecosystems protect our coastlines from storms and erosion, providing safe habitats for millions of species key to nature's equilibrium, offering food security to billions of people, and shielding against climate change. The Ocean Decade fosters an understanding of the challenges facing our ocean so we can live in harmony with nature. Networks of marine protected areas combined with nature-based solutions can sustain our needs and livelihoods while rebuilding a mindful, sustainable and equitable relationship with our shared ocean. Acting as one global community, we can harness knowledge to build tools that protect, restore and manage marine and coastal ecosystems. In the ocean we want, marine ecosystems are cherished and understood, keeping our ocean healthy and resilient. Are you up to meeting this Ocean Decade Challenge? Join us today.
Ocean Decade Challenge number 3. Sustainably feed the global population. How do we move from the ocean we have to the ocean we want? The ocean has nourished us for thousands of years, fueling and strengthening our communities while underpinning human health and development. Yet growing populations, along with greater awareness of the harmful impacts of land-based meat sources, have driven the demand for ocean-based alternatives. This has led to bigger and unsustainable fishing, trawling and dredging the ocean floor, disturbances in the ocean food web, and disappearing fish species. Is there time to restore ocean seafood resources? Yes. The Ocean Decade allows scientists, governments, and industry to explore and implement innovative solutions that reduce pressure on marine ecosystems by restoring and managing fish stocks, improving aquaculture, and harvesting sustainable seafood. Consuming sustainable seafood is an easy way to join the Ocean Decade. Together, we can support communities relying on seafood resources for their livelihoods while multiplying the seafood the ocean supplies. In the ocean we want, we protect crucial ocean habitats and harvest seafood mindfully so we can always rely on the ocean to feed the global population. Are you up to meeting this Ocean Decade Challenge? Join us today.
Ocean Decade Challenge number 4. Develop a sustainable and equitable ocean economy. How do we move from the ocean we have to the ocean we want? The ocean provides livelihoods and nourishment for hundreds of millions of the world's poorest people. The global economy depends on the ocean through fisheries, energy, tourism, and transport. The way we manage and share the ocean's limited resources has a global impact on coastal communities, indigenous peoples, and marine ecosystems. Let's seize the ocean decade to unlock transformative ocean science solutions that connect people with the ocean in a productive cycle. Investing in ocean science and technological innovations will create employment opportunities around the world and multiply sixfold the amount of seafood available. A clean, healthy ocean also impacts tomorrow's renewable energy sources, minerals, and medical breakthroughs. Over the next 10 years, Blue Knowledge will give us the tools to use and manage our marine resources for a healthy and productive ocean, for the well-being of humankind and the planet. In the ocean we want, both society and planet benefit from an equitable and sustainable ocean economy, so no one is left behind. Are you up to meeting this Ocean Decade Challenge? Join us today.
Ocean Decade Challenge number 5. Unlock ocean-based solutions to climate change. How do we move from the ocean we have to the ocean we want? The ocean is our greatest ally against climate change. It absorbs heat and carbon in the atmosphere. Mangroves and coral reefs protect communities against climate change effects. Ocean-based energy reduces harmful greenhouse gas emissions. But our ocean is unhealthy, with rising temperatures and sea levels, acidic waters, shrinking glaciers, disappearing ecosystems and species, intense weather events, and fish populations shifting toward cooler waters. This leaves our planet and humanity at great risk. Time is ticking. Life and livelihoods in many small island states are already suffering. Ocean science helps us understand ocean-climate interactions with data and knowledge to predict and respond to changes. Together, let's harness the Ocean Decade for ocean-based solutions to help mitigate, adapt, and build resilience to climate change, like making smarter investments in technologies that lower greenhouse gas emissions. From mountain to seashore, from small island communities to the largest cities. In the ocean we want, our ocean protects us and makes us resilient to climate change. Are you up to meeting this Ocean Decade Challenge? Join us today.
Ocean Decade Challenge number 6. Increase community resilience to ocean hazards. How do we move from the ocean we have to the ocean we want? Rising sea levels, harmful algae blooms, and more frequent destructive storms are putting the lives and livelihoods of coastal communities around the world in jeopardy. As threats increase, experts and authorities must have the knowledge to issue warnings, and communities must have the skills and information to respond effectively. The Ocean Decade will foster investment in more effective forecast and early warning systems so we can reduce risks and save lives on land and at sea. From global early warning systems to coastal cities and communities ready to face tsunamis, storm surges, and rising sea levels, to coastal and marine ecosystems that are protected and can offer nature-based solutions to protect communities and infrastructure. Let's harness ocean knowledge to empower individuals and prepare communities so they are ready to face natural ocean hazards. In the ocean we want, people and communities are safe and resilient because we can reduce and respond to the hazards of a dynamic ocean. Are you up to meeting this Ocean Decade Challenge? Join us today.
Ocean Decade Challenge number 7. Expand the global ocean observing system. How do we move from the ocean we have to the ocean we want? We're all connected through one shared ocean, from the coast to the high seas, from the ocean's surface to its depths. Sharing information and technology keeps us safe, our economies productive, and our ocean healthy. Through ocean observing systems, scientists, experts, and governments share observations for climate, operational services, and marine ecosystem health. But the current system has gaps and lacks institutional and financial support. Let's seize the Ocean Decade as a chance to amplify this system's impact, making it sustainable and capable of delivering critical information to those who need it. Together we can expand the knowledge of our past, current, and future ocean, leaving no country behind. A truly inclusive and integrated observing system can predict climate, forecast weather, monitor and manage ocean health, and offer real-time services for sustainable development. In the ocean we want, our global ocean observing system tells us about the state of our ocean, so we can respond to changing conditions wherever we are. Are you up to meeting this Ocean Decade Challenge? Join us today.
Ocean Decade Challenge number 8. Create a digital representation of the ocean. How do we move from the ocean we have to the ocean we want? First, we must fully explore today's ocean. Its countless challenges and endless possibilities. Sometimes this means understanding the past, and sometimes this means projecting the future. Today, we know more about the moon than we do the ocean. But we have a unique opportunity to change this. Working with some of the best minds in ocean science, the Ocean Decade fosters partnerships to explore and fully map the ocean, creating a digital atlas of our planet's crown jewel, from surface to depths, from biodiversity to cultural and social values, from shorelines to open spaces. This knowledge will support dynamic and sustainable ocean management in a constantly changing ocean. Let's find new ways to see our past, current, and future ocean through open data and freely shared information. Together, let's create an accessible ocean for present and future generations. In the ocean we want, we know everything about the ocean so that we may better protect and sustainably manage our planet's blue wealth. Are you up to meeting this Ocean Decade Challenge? Join us today.
Ocean Decade Challenge 9. Deliver skills, knowledge, and technology to all. How do we move from the ocean we have to the ocean we want? The answer is we don't. Unless we have the necessary skills, knowledge, and technology readily available to every expert and citizen alike. If we are to reverse our planetary crisis together, everyone needs access to ocean information and the skills to turn that knowledge into sustainable solutions and action. Whether you work in science, government, business, civil society, or are a citizen committed to protecting the ocean, you can play a part in this open ocean knowledge revolution. The Ocean Decade encourages the exchange and sharing of skills, knowledge, and technology to cultivate health responses that can collectively promote a clean, safe, and accessible ocean for present and future generations. Let's use the Ocean Decade to build bridges between disciplines and across geographical and generational divides, to radically open access to data, technology, and skills, and achieve together the ocean we want by 2030. Are you up to meeting this Ocean Decade Challenge? Join us today.
Ocean Decade Challenge number 10. Change humanity's relationship with the ocean. How do we go from the ocean we have to the ocean we want? Let's start with a bit of imagination. Imagine an ocean that we no longer take for granted. An ocean that we respect for regulating our climate and inspiring hundreds of cultures around the world. Imagine the power of a whole generation of all ages and walks of life, committed to saving our planet's largest ecosystem. Ocean knowledge gives us a clear picture of the worsening human impacts on the ocean. Education and ocean literacy give us the keys to changing our behavior so that we can protect the ocean. Time for change is running out, but the next 10 years of ocean action will be critical for a step change in our relation with the ocean. The Ocean Decade is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for humanity to reconnect with the ocean, understand its importance to our survival, and use that knowledge to transform our relationship. In the ocean we want, we live respectfully with our shared ocean, carefully and sustainably managing its precious resources. Are you up to meeting this Ocean Decade Challenge? Join us today. Ocean Decade Challenge number 1. Understand and beat marine pollution. How do we move from the ocean we have to the ocean we want? Today, we see plastic waste everywhere, from the ocean depths to the remotest islands of the Pacific. Yet the ocean is also menaced by pollution we cannot see. Untreated sewage, pesticides and fertilizers, toxic chemicals, heavy metals and other harmful substances. They're not just a threat to marine life, but also to human health and livelihoods. The Ocean Decade is an opportunity to identify, map, and reduce these sources of pollution. Working hand in hand, scientists, businesses, governments, and many other groups can create and roll out solutions that eliminate pollution at the source, reduce its impacts, and deliver a clean ocean for us all. And as consumers, we all have an important role to play over the next 10 years to beat marine pollution. In the ocean we want, we embrace habits of buying and consuming that help keep our ocean clean and healthy. Are you up to meeting this Ocean Decade Challenge? Join us today.
and welcome to the wrap-up of our 6th Ocean Decade Laboratory, An Accessible Ocean, hosted as always by the German Federal Ministry of Education and Research in partnership with the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission of UNESCO, in short, IOC-UNESCO. My name is Monica Jones, and I'm happy to be back to guide you through our 90-minute program of this special wrap-up, because we not only wrap up what happened over the past 48 hours, but will extend it and add content by having actually a third panel discussion that will continue from where we left off during the core event 2 days ago. So a special wrap up for you. Now, this laboratory, as you may know, is part of a series because the United Nations General Assembly proclaimed 2021 to 2030 as the United Nations Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development, which in short is, of course, the Ocean Decade. And the aim is to bring together scientists, stakeholders, you, in order to help restore our planet's largest ecosystem, that of course is the ocean, by preparing a path for sustainable development. Now, the first International Ocean Decade Conference, a high-level event, was kicked off last year, and since then there are a series of Ocean Decade laboratories taking place. 5 already took place, and today we have the 6th out of 7 laboratories in total. Before we, however, deep dive into the content of this laboratory and this wrap-up in particular, let me just bring you up to date with our conference platform so you can make the most of it. Now, first of all, you need to be in the live stream, and I assume you are, else you wouldn't see and hear me. You can choose the language in which you want to follow our event. That's English, French, Spanish, or English with subtitles. Now, this is special in this wrap-up now because I would like to encourage you to also take a look at our chat box, that white one, so you can submit your questions and comments during the panel discussion, which we will have in this wrap-up. Now, in order to get an idea about the agenda, day 1 is over, day 2 is over, but day 3, right now, the wrap-up, just scroll below the live stream so you see what happens. And of course, if you need any help, then you can go to the live desk now during this wrap-up and meet our team there who will support you. On the left-hand side, we have a deep green column with lots of buttons. Worth mentioning is the lounge, because here you can find all the laboratories that already took place and review them. To find out more about our speakers, you scroll down to Speakers Corner, where you can find all the biographies. And right below, you find the satellite activities. There are 22 in total. 1 is yet to happen. It'll take place after this wrap-up later on. And in our Ocean Library, you find tons of materials, photos, documents, videos. You're encouraged and welcome to download them, share them, as long as you credit the author. And you also find the FAQ section there, the most frequently asked questions, and the answers, of course, as well. Now, if you use Twitter, then that would be fantastic. If you also use the hashtag Ocean Decade. And if you watch us on YouTube right now, then first of all, hello, welcome, good to have you with us. But if you also want to engage with us, you can't do that via YouTube. You would have to register on this platform, and it's still possible. I just tell you, it's oceandecade-conference.com, and then you and everybody else, of course, can engage and send your questions via the chat. And I'm sure that 2 people who are in the studio in Berlin with me right now would be very happy if you did engage and also submit your questions and comments. And I'm talking about our chairs who are back with me today. Professor Dr. Anna-Katharina Hornitsch. She's director of the German Development Institute and professor for global sustainable development at the University of Bonn here in Germany, and she's in Berlin with us, which is fantastic. Good to have you with us, Anna-Katharina. And Sebastian Unger is back as well. He's head of the Ocean Governance Research Group at the Institute for Advanced Sustainability Studies in Potsdam, just around the corner from us, really, with over 15 years of experience in international ocean policy. And I have to say, both of you look fresh. The last 48 hours probably weren't too busy, or were they?
Well, I think we discussed a lot. We learned a lot. The emphasis that became very clear also as part of the satellite events was lying on the urgency, the urgent need to act. We know a lot. We know the ocean from a whole range of disciplinary perspectives, from different scale levels, from different regional perspectives, from different knowledge systems, scientific, non-scientific. But we need to act. We have quite a number of different crises building up: climate change, biodiversity loss, a debt crisis, a geopolitical power shifts, I should say, that build up on each other, that develop dynamics between them, that come with increasing risks, and we need to invest into our steering capacities for dealing with these. The ocean is crucial in these multiple crises, and I'm really excited to today move towards reflecting on the science policy interfaces and reflecting on these out of the perspective of the many different satellite events that took place yesterday. Thanks.
Sebastian.
Yeah, we had indeed very exciting discussions yesterday, and I was impressed also by what we heard from both policymakers and scientists in our two discussion panels. I was impressed how aligned their views were, but also with their message that we definitely need to act urgently. There was hope. There are tools how science can be a driver for transformations towards sustainability. So this was really good to hear and good to discuss, and also encouraging how broad participation has been in our lab. I think we had participants from all across the world, from different sea basins, from different continents.
And we should see that very, very soon. So do you have an idea about it? Because it's very evenly spread there.
You can see that even in time zones that were not so comfortable in Oceania and Australia, we had participation. And what is really interesting, we managed to get a dialogue between science and other ocean actors. So almost half of our participants were scientists, the other half were other ocean actors from civil society, from industry, from arts and culture, etc. So that was really good, and that's exactly the dialogue we need in the ocean decade.
Exactly. I mean, 71 different countries the participants came from. I think that's a very broad participation there. And again, with Asia and North America and Africa, really big and impressive numbers. Very, very happy about that. And it also illustrates, actually, the fact that the satellite activities that started basically on Tuesday, sort of right up after the core event, and as I mentioned, they're going through today, the last one starting after this wrap-up. They took also place all around the globe and in different time zones. And we just pick out two now for you to review those satellite activities for you, coming up now. All right, let's start with one satellite activity that was actually based in Germany. Access means the ability to reach a resource, but it also entails the capacity to derive benefits from it. What does this imply for accessible ocean science, and what is required to make ocean knowledge accessible for multiple stakeholders? Lots of questions in that satellite activity that we're going to review now. Accessible ocean science, ? Negotiating notions of access. And for that, we now welcome Mirja Schoderer. She's a researcher for the Environmental Governance Program at the German Development Institute. So I'm sure she's very much familiar also with Anna-Katrina Hornich, our chair. And Mirja's work looks at how ocean knowledge is produced, shared, and used, in particular in relation to marine CO2 observations. So now I shared a little bit with our participants about you, Mirja, but obviously what we really want to know is what happened during that satellite activity. What did you discuss and what solutions did you come up with?
Thanks, Monica. Nice to be here. Honestly, what did we discuss? Many things. And the main question was, if you consider accessible ocean science from different perspectives, what does that mean to the people who talk about accessible science? And essentially, we had a data manager in our panel. So we had a panel discussion with people from data management, from natural sciences, from social sciences. We also had a policy implementer who works in development cooperation and a science communicator, because we were thinking that all of these people engage with ocean science and they all might have a different understanding of what accessible means and what is required for that. And interestingly, as controversial as the discussions were, there was also a lot of agreement in the room. And ultimately, they agreed on the fact that to be accessible, ocean science needs to be understandable. It needs to speak to policymakers and to society, to resonate with them, to answer questions that are relevant to them. But it also needs to be understanding. That is, science needs to be reflective of the extent to which it is still shaped by power, and recognize that there's important knowledge out there that is not scientific and does not necessarily have to be made scientific to be relevant. And then obviously there's things like the FAIR principles that play a role in creating access. So for example, that knowledge needs to be findable. You need to be able to view data and publications without paywalls, have interoperable data and reusable data.
Well, that sort of almost summarizes also what we've been discussing during the core event, really, about having all these different angles of knowledge and access, as you said, the different kinds of notions of what accessibility to the ocean actually means, and where we see eye to eye, where we have different perspectives, and somehow bringing it together in order then to share that knowledge with the decision makers. Did you find out what kind of interfaces are maybe necessary, or of those existing ones, perhaps the most helpful in order to achieve that?
Not necessarily which ones are the most helpful, but we did speak about sort of specific prerequisites that need to be met to make ocean science more accessible. And well, for one thing, we all think that scientists need to become better communicators, or to work more closely with communicators, so that this culture of sharing and openness that is already being established can be better enabled, for example, also by technical and organizational infrastructure, so that we can make data accessible that is non-numerical, that is sitting in archives at this point, so that we can connect all of these separate islands of knowledge without one, taking over the other, so everything just feeding into science only. And for that, we also think that incentive structures need to change. So if you have project funding that needs to include resources, that needs to include time for inter- and transdisciplinary exchange, time for outreach activities, money for outreach activities, and all these things that are so essential, that different knowledge systems can come together and can have a dialogue at eye level. Within different sciences, but also outside of science.
So, that's interesting, because, this is something that you certainly discussed during the satellite activity. How do you think the UN Ocean Decade, which the name says it, is 10 years? Well, now it's maybe sort of 8.5 left. How can the Ocean Decade help in order to achieve what you just described?
I think the Ocean Decade is a good platform to bring different people together, scientists, communicators, policymakers, and to sort of get that ball rolling, start that exchange. Because I think if we want to change incentive structures in science, that means for scientists to change, to be, humble about what we know and what we don't know, and also to be willing to be uncomfortable in exchanges that are not necessarily what we're used to. But it also means that we need support from policymakers to change funding structures, to change how our performance is evaluated, so that we can put time and resources into delivering the science that they also need.
Well, Mirja Schoderer, thank you so much for very briefly recapping a very, very interesting satellite activity there that was based in Bonn. Thank you so much. And we would like to just look at one more satellite activity, and that one actually takes us to Costa Rica, where that took place. And it was highlighting the potential of an app for protected area management, direct action, and existing data sharing and response partnership. And that satellite activity was entitled the Save the Waves app, an everyday conservation tool. And for that, we bring in Diego Sancho Gallegos. He works as the Surf Conservation Data Coordinator at the California-based international nonprofit Save the Waves Coalition. And he actually runs the Save the Waves app project, creating data partnerships and infrastructure to optimize response to citizen-identified threats via the app. Diego, good to have you with us. Do tell us first about the workshop itself, or the satellite activity itself. Did you have a lot of interest there? What were the discussions about?
Yes, thank you so much for having me. It's really an honor to be here. The satellite activity itself was really great. We presented the app as this tool for everyday conservation, as we were saying, which the goal is to empower coastal users to use it to monitor and protect coastal ecosystems. It's very simple. And so we talked a little bit about, what the real life implications of that work is. So like once someone uses, the people use this app to report threats, like what happens next? How does that translate to real conservation? And so we had our programs team at Save the Waves come talk a little bit about how we use the app in our everyday work through protected area management, direct action, and through our data sharing partnerships, which are really key to this whole project, because with the data sharing partnerships, we pretty much are creating alliances with groups and organizations that have real response capacity on the ground. So when we get these threats, say coastal erosion, coastal development, trash, any of these like major threats that the coasts are facing, we then partner with organizations that are equipped with the tools to respond to the threats that are being posed by everyday citizens. People who use the beach for surfing, for diving, for just tanning, beach going. Anyone who really spends time on these coastlines can use this app as a way to protect and be part of the solution. So that's the app, and that's how we use it. And really at the core of the app is accessibility, because and that's something we really hammered on throughout the satellite activity, because it's in 4 languages as well. It's in English, Spanish, Portuguese, and French. It's available for iOS and Android, so both kinds of phones. And we also have a web form for people who don't have smartphones or don't have enough up-to-date technology to also be part of be part of this platform. And so it's really that's on the user side, and then on the data side, all the data is open access, so any organization can benefit from this. We created it as a way for us to have a centralized repository of all the threats that we kept getting from all the places where we work. It was just not that efficient to have just emails back and forth of what was going on. So this is more of like people can use this app, report on the threats, and then we can respond to them in a way more efficient way. And any other organization can use it because all the data is available from our website, and the app is free for download. So the same platform can be replicated in any part of the world, pretty much. And so we see a lot of value in it, because we derive. If you want to change the slide, I can talk a little bit about. That's how it works. It's very simple. And you just take a photo of the threat, you find a category for that threat, geolocate it automatically, and then you can take further action. So super easy to use. And next slide, please. And so these are some examples of like what the actual stewardship looks like in some of the places where we work. These are different World Surfing Reserves, which is a program where we designate. It's like a distinction for places where the community gets together to protect the surf ecosystem. So like the surf spot. And so these are the managers of these protected areas have been using the app to track the threats, to have real-time monitoring, and then working groups around coastal erosion have sprouted as a result. Beach cleanups, watershed cleanups as well, which is really important because everything that happens on the river ends up in the ocean. And so, oil spill responses, all these things end up working together. So yeah, that's kind of what we did, what we talked about. And really the takeaway is that we need to work together. We need a coalition. We need everyone in the space to get involved and leverage the existing tools that we're all putting out there. And
Yeah. No, I mean, fantastic, Diego. And also, I mean, you answered a question that I even haven't asked yet, because I'm not a very tech-savvy person. I was wondering how this app actually works, because it's mostly, if I understood you correctly, we're talking about people who go to the beach or spend time on the ocean for leisure. So we're not talking about scientists, but they can actually help scientists by using this app. And it was very nicely explained how to go about it. But how many of those apps, how many of those individuals would we need in order to make this app a real helpful tool in order to achieve what we're trying to achieve, namely an accessible ocean?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, if the idea is everyone has a phone, right? So everyone can be a part of this. Everyone could potentially become, another source of important data. I think, we work on it from like a local basis to, we expand from locally to regionally. So I think, as you get more people in each site and you start to really see that value, that starts to multiply across different areas of the world. And so ideally, everyone who uses the beach can become a citizen scientist, right? Which is the goal of the app. We really wanted to be accessible to everybody, so that everyone can have a real tangible way to be part of all these efforts and not feel overwhelmed by everything that's going on and not knowing how to act.
Of course, because especially if a layman, so just a normal person with that app, thinks something might not be quite right, takes a picture and sends it on, and the expert then looks at it and says, well, there's nothing to worry about. I mean, how big is the risk that you just get drowned in information that is ultimately not really that relevant? Or is this no fear of yours at all?
I mean, there's definitely a risk with citizen science, and I think people who work in the space understand that. I think that's where quality control really comes in, and triangulating the data with local partners. So making sure that when there's a report, before you act, you check in with your local partners, you see what's going on, see if it's a real issue, how it fits into, or how it's framed into the context of that specific site. And so I think that's where the collaboration bit comes in, and it's really important to have those relationships in place. Which is the way we do the work we do.
Diego, just one last question. Where does the name, the title, Save the Wave app come from? Why saving the waves?
So, because I work at Save the Waves Coalition. That's the name of the NGO that created this app. And so it was the idea of what we do is we protect, our mission is to protect surf ecosystems, because surfers are a huge constituency that is really not being, or hasn't been tapped for conservation efforts that much. So we focused there and kind of created this app as like a way for us to centralize all of the threats and reports that surfers are seeing on their everyday, when they go surfing every day, they're like the canaries in the coal mine, right? So they know what's going on in the ocean before anyone else does. And the idea was, by creating this app, we can leverage that, those surfers, and kind of have, over 35 million people around the world who surf, use it and provide threats. And now we've realized that it doesn't have to be surfers. It can be divers, it could be fisher people, it could be beachgoers. Anyone can really benefit from this app. So that's kind of where the name came from, and it's stuck as a result.
Well, great. A very cool idea, and surely very, very helpful. Diego, thank you so much. Thank you so much for this contribution and for sharing the satellite activity with us. And there were so many more satellite activities, but in a wrap-up, we usually can only pick a few. And then there was also the core event, of course, and there was a lot of interesting things being said there as well. Let's just take a look at some of the highlights. and welcome to our 6th Ocean Decade Laboratory, An Accessible Ocean.
At this Ocean Decade Laboratory, we want to discuss and explore an accessible ocean with you. That is, an ocean with good governance, open access to data, information and technologies.
And I hope very much that this laboratory, Accessible Ocean Laboratory, will set us on the path to a more accessible ocean and to our better human relations with the ocean.
We are in a situation of multiple crises at the moment, and we realize the great transformation has to be accelerated.
The next 10 years during the UN decade will be crucial for the future of the ocean.
Ocean, to date, we know is the greatest mitigator of climate change. We know that, however, its role as a carbon sink needs a lot more research to understand the changes, but we know that there's enough information to act.
The challenge is to have it together and to allow us really to combine this information in such a manner that we can understand much better the accumulation of pressures and impacts.
We really need to move away from inter and multidisciplinary to transdisciplinary work. It's like baking a cake. So we need to really find ways to co-design our ecosystem-based management so that everybody has a stake in it.
Madagascar has given us fantastic solutions where you convince local communities to protect locally local areas and manage those areas as marine protected areas.
All actions are local, but unless we're acting together, we're not going to solve these problems.
People do feel a genuine affinity for life, for the importance the ocean has in sustaining the natural world. So in fact, this then talks immediately to the importance of getting the word out there and talking directly to children. So children will bother their parents about it, and the parents will bother the politicians about it.
And really drive a conversation so that it moves into that space of recognising the key role that the ocean plays for human life on this planet.
We need to integrate flexibility into our work with data, our approaches to data acquisition, and most likely create some kinds of standards. An African proverb that says knowledge is like a garden. If it's not cultivated, it cannot be harvested.
We need a step change in how we observe our oceans. We need something akin to an international ocean space station, something that's where nations can step up internationally and co-invest in a structure that allows us to observe the ocean in the way we absolutely need to observe it to have security for our climate goals.
I hear from all of you a strong plea for, on the one side, diversity of knowledge, types of knowledge systems, but assuring that they stand in close dialogue with each other, that they stand in a coordinated, in a constructive dialogue with each other.
We need a step change in the way how we bring together science, how we communicate science to policy making. That's the continuity that's needed, that is stable funding, it's frameworks and dialogue systems, and we need to have processes that create trust between science, policy making, and those people that are affected by those decisions on the ground. And we need to create the collaborative frameworks both at the regional and at the global level.
Well, some strong statements there during the core event, some really interesting discussions, and I would like to rope in Anna-Katrina and Sebastian again. Just watching this highlight again, I mean, what a wonderful image there that all of them, but for me in particular, Anna Waite painted there of what we need is basically the same that space has. Instead of an ISS, International Space Station, we need an International Ocean Station. Now there's a thought. I'd be very much interested in your key takeaways.
Yeah, thanks, Monica. Let me just emphasize 2 points. One is on incentive structures, and the other one on our science policy interfaces, on our advisory board landscape, basically. I think in quite a few of the satellite events we had topics raised that reflected and push us into the reflection of our incentive mechanisms within science, and in order to create that space and build the space further between science and policy making. And what we know is that interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary ocean science is a field where we need to build networks further. We need to invest into in order to develop social innovations, in order to also develop institutional innovations, and build the networks within different regional contexts on different scale levels, in order to then enable and carry it on by these networks the dialogue processes between science and policy making. And here we still have a few meters to go, and we need to go these meters very quickly, because we need to act now and invest into this, building that space between science and policy making.
So luckily we have another session on exactly that point.
Yeah, and for me, basically, the main message was the urgency. We have to act now. The good news is the knowledge is there already to act, but we have to act faster, and science can be a driving force for this transformative shift, and for that we need a better articulation of the interface between science and policy making. It became clear that we need to communicate better between science and policy making, and this is why I'm looking so much forward to our discussion now about exactly this very question. For me, one of the key questions, or for us, one of the key questions for the UN Ocean Decade, and a great opportunity to improve this interface.
And can I just come in once again and say a few words on the scientific advisory board landscape? Well, we have quite a well-developed landscape of scientific advisory boards within the German context, with a focus on sustainability research, sustainability-related policy making. But the ocean hardly plays a role, or only at very sort of particular moments, and then again it's quite sidelined. So I would really hope and encourage us to build that landscape further and assure that we carry the ocean into the overall landscapes in different national, regional contexts that exist within this space, in the in-between space between science and policymaking. And the scientific advisory board landscape is crucial here. I mean, the same, I think, holds true for the international level, Sebastian.
Yeah, that's true. Internationally, we have a couple of science policy bodies, and it's great to have David with us today, Uburo, who works with IPBES, one of the great examples. We have ICES that has a long tradition and a very strong role in science policy advice. But I think there's a strong feeling also in the ocean community that we can learn more from, for example, how the science policy interface works in the climate arena, and I think this will be part of our discussion today.
Before we get to this discussion, because obviously also the satellite activities were not just they didn't just have the tunnel view, and we're not just working in silos, but they actually came up with recommendations on exactly those issues. And I think we've collected some of the most frequently mentioned recommendations here. I'd be very interested in your assessment of what we see here.
I think a clear voice came from most of the satellite events showing that indeed we need to work on this science policy interface. We need to engage much more directly with stakeholders from different angles, and this is quite important to harvest their knowledge, to bring this knowledge into decision making on the one hand, but on the other hand also to get their buy-in for the implementation of policies. And doing this at different scales globally is one thing, but really translating this down to the regional and the local level is really something that is important, and that science and stakeholders need to collaborate much much more closely together.
Yeah, I also just want to emphasize this standardization and diversity. Yeah? I mean, it's quite a wide stretch that we are asking for here, but I think it's important to emphasize. On the one side, we need to further develop our standardizing and standardization setting processes in order to assure that the different data sets, the different types of knowledge speak to each other, but they have to be put into dialogue with each other in a way that allows for diversity of the type of data, of how they are collected, how they are being, on which kind of scale levels, in which kind of contexts, scientific, non-scientific type of knowledges, in order to really here build constructive dialogues in the interests of the ocean.
Absolutely. I mean, nobody said it would be easy. Nobody said it would be easy. That's why we need the entire ocean decade, but hopefully we don't have to wait until the very end of December 2030, in order to come up with the kind of solutions we're looking for. Sadly, we can't even wait until the end of this wrap-up, Anna-Katharina Hornich, because I know you have another very, very important appointment to meet, but it was great to have you here for the core event and for most of this as well now. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks.
Because we now have, and both Anne-Katharina and Sebastian have been touching upon it now several times, we have this great panel coming up now, because it is a kind of a synthesis of the discussions that took place during the core event. And this panel is now looking at the question, what kind of science architecture is required to deliver relevant science to policy?
Well, it's a pleasure to be here today.
Just hold on, we can't hear you yet. I was waiting for a beautiful visual, we could call it key visual, that we've used so far, but obviously technically there is some sort of hiccup, but that shouldn't stop us. Let's do without the visual. I already gave, we do it with the visual. It's coming, just bear with me. And now we're ready. I'm ready, certainly, to hand over now to the person steering this high-level discussion. We're absolutely delighted to welcome now our laboratory co-chair, the senior high seas advisor to IUCN's Global Marine and Polar Program, Christina Gerdy. Christina, so good to have you with us, and I look forward to you and your panel, of course. Over to you.
Well, thank you so much for this opportunity to help convene this amazing panel of three experts. I am excited to be able to join you today, for we have no small task ahead. We've been told that we are baking a cake, planting a garden, as well as laying the foundation for an international ocean space station. For this, we're going to need to build some amazing bridges to help intertwine that ocean science, knowledge, society, and transmission, indeed, from outer space to our policymakers. We all know that to achieve sustainable development, good science is needed to inform policies, to increase the knowledge of all stakeholders, and ultimately deliver the solutions to address the decline in ocean health. We have been hearing throughout this lab that a continuing challenge for ocean science is to be inclusive, equitable, relevant, and accessible to all. And what's more is making ocean data more findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable will be key. An equally huge challenge that we are also addressing today is how to ensure that the information derived from such data is actually used to inform management and decision-making processes across all scales, from local to national, regional to global. As we have learned from existing science policy processes, such as the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change, and IPBES, for that to be achieved, the information must be relevant, salient, and legitimate. that is trusted, important, and address questions relevant to managers and decision makers. Today, we will explore both aspects, how to enhance equity in, as well as uptake of ocean science, so that it truly informs the ocean we all want and need across generations. The session will be organized via questions to each panelist, followed by joint discussions, and then questions that we are welcoming from you, the audience. Please send them directly as they arrive in your brains, and Monica Jones will help bridge their transition to our discussions. First, I'd like to introduce Professor Antje Boisjes, who is director of the Alfred Wegener Institute Helmholtz Center for Polar and Marine Research. She's an active polar and deep sea researcher who has taken part in nearly 50 expeditions, focusing on the effects of climate change in the Arctic Ocean and biodiversity in the deep sea. Professor Boisjes, earlier in this year, you addressed French President Macron and other heads of state and government in the One Ocean Summit in Brest. What is your experience in communicating science to policymakers? What is working and what isn't? What can we learn from that for the design of future ocean science policy interfaces? Thanks.
Oh, that's a good question. So policymakers, as I got to know them, are people who work really hard to change the way we humans behave, organize ourselves. They provide us with rules for the better. And that has to do with creating an enormous knowledge themselves about the journey humanity is in. And in all of that complexity, as scientists come and we have a strong message and some facts. And to communicate efficiently, I found the best way is to implant some visions, some experiences, some key visuals in the minds for those people working so hard on changing the path we're on, so that they can relate to the facts, that it's not just data, but that there's something to think that's really worth fighting for. A story from what we have seen out there in the poles or out there deep under the sea, a certain species, an animal that fascinates us, a landscape. So anything that where humans to humans connect and we have images and know exactly what is worth fighting for, what is at stake, that's what I always try to do when I communicate.
Fascinating. We need to be creating those images of what is truly at stake. I think that's why so many of us love watching films and listening to scientists speak. But at the same time, you are also a strong advocate for diversity and equity in science and related interfaces to policy and society. What kind of partnerships might be promoted to help ensure that all scientists in all nations have access to the scientific tools, platforms, and research skills needed to advance our understanding in this rapidly changing ocean?
Yeah, the truth is that we could really be already much better at that. Of course, some of the ocean infrastructures, they are really super high tech. If you want to dive to the greatest depths, it's almost like creating a mission to space. But in space, also, we have learned that it should be international. People should share this change of perspective to the space they're in, be it the universe, be it the oceans into which we dive, be it the perspective of the animals or the plants we want to protect, or even that of the microbes. The way I imagine we could much improve is to create programs to share infrastructure like we do with polar vessels, where we open up berths that are there so that anyone can apply for them. But even more than that, we need to include all kinds of knowledge. So I'm currently dreaming of a new mission of mankind for Antarctica, where all of our negotiations for protected marine areas, like the Kamala program, come to a halt because we are getting into war businesses. We cannot even speak anymore to each other. So I'm dreaming of a mission of mankind to Antarctica where we compile all knowledge available from anyone, NGOs, sailors, extreme sports people, scientists. And then in the Arctic, the same thing, including indigenous who live there much longer than me, for example, to create this feeling of one knowledge that is the basis for protecting in a good way and measuring achievements in protection, a reference basis of knowledge. That's what I'm dreaming of, and I think that would be the good approach to take.
That's very exciting. Please sign me up for this voyage of mankind, mission of mankind to Antarctica. That was, I think there is nothing that really helps to bring that resonance as being there in the cold and dark and very wet of nights. But many of us don't get close, don't get chance. Well, thank you. We'll be coming back to you soon. Dr. David Obura is next up. He is the founding director of Cordio East Africa, which is a knowledge organization supporting sustainability of coral reef and marine systems in the Western Indian Ocean. Cordio provides research for management and policy, what we're talking about today, as well as building capacity, and works with stakeholders, managers, and policymakers. David's primary research is on coral reef resilience, but he is more and more turning towards sustainability science, using coral reefs as a model. In this hat, he currently serves on the Earth Commission, and co-chairs the IPBES Nexus Assessment. David, as co-chair of this IPBES Nexus Assessment, you will be examining the interlinkages amongst the various sustainable development goals related to food and water security, health for all, protecting biodiversity on land and the oceans, and combating climate change. No small task. Could you please outline what opportunities this major IPBES assessment provides for future ocean governance, and what challenges you foresee?
Thank you, Christina, and wonderful to be here with you and the other panel members. Yes, so this IPBES Nexus Assessment is going to be a complicated affair to start up, because we want to look at interlinkages amongst these 5 elements that you mentioned: biodiversity, climate, water, food, and health. And in the context of the policy approach framed by the SDGs. And that's important for us, because really this assessment process is to bring science to policy. And by putting these nexus elements, these important parts of the Earth system, into one of the SDG goals, we can then get to talk about the policy around them and also how they interlink with one another. Of course, the ocean is a very important part of the Sustainable Development Goal framework in Goal 14. So, of course, we will be addressing it in the Nexus assessment. But this is a global assessment. It's really about, life on Earth and how people are dependent on it. And so ocean aspects do tend to get overshadowed by terrestrial, but we'll do our best to make sure that to bring in the ocean sections. Of course, we'll build on ocean-based assessments that have been done. The World Ocean Assessment is, of course, critical to that. I think we'll hear about that from Jörn coming up next. The ocean climate debate under the IPCC is also very important, and we want to link that and really show how we shouldn't be talking about the ocean isolated from all these other elements, but really bring them all together. And I think and of course there are many challenges in doing that. Around the oceans, there are major knowledge gaps and information gaps that we'll face. But in writing these assessments, we do have to be as succinct as possible in communicating to policymakers. So we'll need to dress up the information from land and from the sea to be as short as possible. But we'll really address these major questions of the global public goods and global commons, of which the ocean is one of the most important. So we'll certainly do our best to bring that in.
Wonderful to have you helping us build bridges between land and sea and ocean and climate and people. You have worked extensively on ways to communicate complex sustainability challenges and pathways towards implementation. For example, with the SDG 14, as you were just describing, could you highlight how science communication and interfaces between science, policy, and society can deal with such complexities, but in a way that triggers a timely and effective response?
Yes, I think that's a critical issue. And I think, as brought up by Antje just before, actually, I think it's really important that we shift away from a perspective that we've had in science from simplifying our message per se, to really being more real about it. I think it's very important that we recognize the interest or the domain of different audiences that we need to speak to. So the perspective of a scientist, with all of our quantification and our theory and analysis, is not necessarily more complex than that of a policymaker, who faces many competing interests, or a fisher, who balances many daily pressures and has to decide on so many different things. I've tried to show this through the SDGs, how they can be treated this way, looking at the SDGs through the perspectives of a community or a family that is fishing by the sea. And I think in coming years, our science policy interfaces need to become more real and honest and really address and name key issues and reduce jargon and unnecessary complexity in order to really build bridges across the interest groups that need to communicate more effectively.
Fascinating. I love the image of how do all the SDGs intertwine and relate to a family living by the sea, from education to equity to health to food, as well as continued homes and shorelines. So now we'll transition to Dr. Jorn Schmidt, who is the chair of the Science Committee of the International Council for Exploration of the Sea, ICES, based in Copenhagen, Denmark. He works in socio-ecological systems, marine and fisheries ecology, inter and transdisciplinary concepts, knowledge co-production, and I think most interestingly, games for communication of all of the above. So we're interested in how you're going to gamify your next tasks as member of the group of experts and German focal point for the World Ocean Assessment and co-lead of the UN Decade Program SmartNet. But most specifically, as chair of the Science Committee of the International Council for Exploration of the Sea, you oversee a science of science organization that brings together over 6,000 scientists in 20 member countries. How do you manage to bring together this vast amount of expertise to generate state-of-the-art knowledge for marine conservation and sustainable ocean use? Over to you.
Thank you very much, Christina, and thank you very much for having me. And a very good question indeed. And I think one core let's say interest of scientists is always to connect and to work with others. And what ICES is doing, it provides a sustained infrastructure to allow the scientists to work together in at the moment around 120 multi-annual expert groups that are covering a relatively broad range of different fields, from stock assessment, very basic stock assessments, to more ecology-related groups like zooplankton ecology, benthic ecology, marine mammal ecology, to groups that are looking into human activities and human interactions with the ocean on renewable energy, on specifically offshore wind, on shipping, and other topics. And I think the 6,000 experts that you mentioned from the 20 member countries, we are not only having them from the 20 member countries, but last year I think we had experts coming from over 65 different countries. And I think what we're providing as a sustained infrastructure to allow these experts to work together on a platform, and all of the work that is being produced by these experts is actually accessible. It is available. We are producing scientific reports of the work of the experts that has been produced in the groups, that is accessible. The sciences, of course, and has been mentioned by Sebastian earlier on, ICES is an organization that is not only the science community, but is also using the science to translate that science into relevant advice to international organizations, international bodies like the European Commission, or member countries like Norway, Iceland, the UK. And I think this is an important aspect where the science that has been done by the scientists becomes relevant. And this is, of course, an interest where the scientists see that there is a way that their science actually is being taken up. And that helps, of course, to stimulate that. And ICES is a relatively old organization, but we are constantly developing. And I think one interesting development over the last years has been the extension of the natural science base that has been traditionally in the organization towards including more social sciences, humanities, with the recognition that a lot of the issues we're looking into, and I think David said that very nicely, we had a long period of time where we tried to simplify, but we're trying to make the complexity of the system more understandable. And I mean, this visualization, producing images, making that accessible is, I think that is where you need the multiplicity of the different experts. And I think that is also an interest, because it's a platform where all of these groups can work together, and you can bridge the interests, and you can actually create a true interdisciplinary work environment, and also a transdisciplinary one, because we're not only communicating as an organization with let's say, the policymaker level, but we're also, of course, engaging a lot with different kinds of stakeholders in different fora.
Fascinating. So you are in some ways providing that international ocean space station by providing at least the infrastructure for collection and exchange of information between and amongst scientists, knowledge holders, and policymakers. You have also been deeply involved in the World Ocean Assessments, as well as the other international and regional assessments of the state of the ocean. What is your experience from these processes? And also, taking into account the work of IPBES and IPBES and IPCC, what would you recommend for future interfaces between ocean science, policy, and society? And the big question is, should the UN decade work towards a new interface or strengthen existing frameworks? Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Christina. That is a very, very good point. And having worked through a lot of these assessments, as you have said, and I think that has been coming through all of the interventions that we heard earlier, where do you interface, and how do you design an interface? Because I mean, we're talking about dialogue. We're talking about a way that we can exchange the needs that are expressed by decision makers, and I always try to make a distinction between policymakers and decision makers, and being very succinct and distinct about what are the needs, because a policymaker might be, and we're talking on the global level, for example, at the moment the negotiations on the BBNJ, the biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction. So it's about developing new legislation, but it's also about having the evidence base to inform existing legislation. So we have these different levels. And it's important, of course, that the science has been translated in a way that the advice is, as you said, rightly so, Christina, and I think it also came through the summary, is salient, credible, and legitimate. And I think there, the high-level processes, which are often seen as too high level, too far away, it's not quite clear what is happening, and that is in the negotiations of the IPCC assessment report at the UNFCCC, for example, the United Nations Framework for Climate Change. Very high level, it's not really understood. Where's the uptake? And I think what is important is that we do strengthen the dialogue more. And as you said, we have a lot of very good bodies. We have an infrastructure already in place on the local scale, on the regional scale, and on the global scale, which should be strengthened rather than thinking about yet another new structure, because a new structure will struggle through the same challenges that all of the others have been struggling through. They need to be developed, there needs to be trust developed, and it needs to be a structure that is being set up in a way that it is actually credible and legitimate. And so I think it is much more meaningful to see how we can use the existing one. And David said it very nicely. I mean, with the Nexus assessment in IPBES, trying to bring in the ocean aspects and working with the World Ocean Assessment, I think we also need to identify ways on how these processes can work more meaningfully, more productively together. We had 2 years ago, I think, my time perception has been messed up with the pandemic, but I think 2 years ago, please correct me if I'm wrong, IPCC and IPBES have produced a joint report. And that was an interesting process because there was a lot of dialogue, an informal dialogue that happened between the experts involved in the two processes, and then a formal dialogue between the secretariats. And I think that is exactly what we need. We need to have exactly that dialogue to be able to make more out of the of the processes that are already in place, because I mean they are there, they are legitimate, they are built in a way that they already have trust, but we do need to strengthen them, and that's specifically true for the World Ocean Assessment. And you mentioned one word that I think I haven't seen in the word cloud, which I think is really important, is synthesize. We need to bring not only all the knowledge together, but we're talking about relevant knowledge. But to be able to understand what the relevant knowledge is, we need to understand what the question is. And I think most often the policymakers and the decision makers are not necessarily clear in formulating a question, and we need to help and have a dialogue and bring that together to be able to understand what they really need, so that we are able to understand how we can synthesize the knowledge in a way that has been helpful for either the policy making or decision making.
Just over to you. How would you respond?
If I can throw something in here, I mean, there are so many levels of knowledge that comes from science that it is probably good to speak for a moment of all of that knowledge that needs accessibility. You have just discussed the direct relevant policy, so where there's often also a pull factor where you really ask as a scientist, please provide an answer to this, and then it needs all the focus, but also all the agreement. And I think in the climate and biodiversity sciences, we have made great progress by having basically an engine room in which all the scientific observations, thousands and thousands of them, are synthesized, and there is a reliable reporting to which people can refer to, like IPCC and IPBES. But when you ask the scientists, increasingly we have a debate, because sometimes it's so fast that things change that we think these large engine rooms of science that synthesize everything are too slow to really address the risks. And increasingly, I hear the public, I hear people saying, so, for example, we have scientific findings of 90% of the Great Barrier Reef bleaching for the last weeks of heat waves. We have unbearable heat waves with huge nature effects in India. We have storm surges in so many places in the world with people losing homes. Look at Africa, look at this gigantic disaster in Africa and all the lives it had cost. And so I understand, and we have to prepare for that there is a question of accessibility of knowledge before it's even published. And that has to do with knowing at all time the risks, knowing the pulse of Earth, and even if it's the extreme pulse, in the extremes. And that is also, that matters to everyone, young and old and poor and rich. We are not using as societal infrastructure the best of our knowledge in our forecast systems. And forecast systems, for example, for forests that burn, droughts, forecast system to storm surges, to rainfalls, all of that could be much better and save lives if we would really take the investment into such infrastructure as we invest in other infrastructures. So I just wanted to throw that in so that, the other side of things, the hectical things, and there where the level of being prepared with scientific knowledge, I think it's becoming increasingly important to have that ready.
Fascinating. We need the engine to work faster. And we need to start being able to shine the lights to see ahead, to predict how all of these risks will be coming together so we can actually prepare ourselves for a multitude of scenarios. That doesn't make the task easier for these science policy infrastructures, because you actually need to be investing in the science gathering, the ocean observations and monitoring, and not just passively waiting for that information to come forward. You have to have the assets in the water too. Our International Ocean Space Station needs to be on the deep sea floor, throughout the water column, and also in our brains. So David, over to you, who's wonderful at visualizing how all these things come together. What do you think in terms of the existing ocean science policy society interface processes? How can we improve what we have? Do we need something new?
Thanks, Christina. No, I think, as Jon said very well, we have a lot of infrastructures that exist, and they, different institutions work at different rates. They do tend to be a bit slow and have inertia, and that's part of the process of synthesizing information and compiling it all together. So I think we need to strengthen what we have. We really need to invest. There's also many parts of the world's ocean which have much less investment in the monitoring and the science infrastructure that is needed to really have a equal or an equitable distribution of information. So a lot of decisions get made on the basis of, synthesis of data sets. But if you have huge data gaps, you're of course going to miss the priorities in those places, and you could make very damaging decisions by not having those data gaps filled. So I think we need to, this sort of international ocean station, I think it's a great idea. We do need it. We need it to be, built up from independent, small, localized, but networked systems that can combine their information together. And as we build up more standards around how information is collected, of course, then maybe we don't need to wait for it to be published. We can combine it because the standards are there to enable that. And we can use it in forecasting and in decision-making, at early stages of the whole process, while scientists can also then publish on it later on. So I think we need to strengthen, build on what we have, and we need to enable what we have to be able to transform. So we need to strengthen capacity so that if change is needed, and surely it will be as we come to that point, these infrastructures can evolve and transform to newer and better systems and standards for linking amongst each other.
Bjorn, please, and then I have a question.
Yeah, thank you very much. I was just triggered by both what Antje and David just said, and what we heard earlier also in the interventions was that you can act much faster if you are on a local scale. And a lot of the very brilliant activities and initiatives that we heard about in the side events and the surf, right? That app, for example, is a very good example of that. There's a lot of these very brilliant initiatives and activities going on. And I mean, that is, I think, something that the decade can do is make them not only more visible, making them not only more accessible, but really linking them, but not only linking them across, but linking them with existing structures in a way that after the decade, all of these local and activities and all these great initiatives have kind of an anchor point where we bring them together. So it's kind of an infrastructure that's dispersed in a way, a dispersed space station infrastructure, where you have a lot of satellites, but they can communicate very effectively through the existing structures, so that, you can exchange on similar topics, you can, exchange on the lessons learned, and as I said, you make them more visible. One of the challenges we are facing is, and you said, like, what is the science policy interface, but also the science society interface, and we talk a lot about ocean literacy and making the ocean more visible to the people that live further away from the ocean. But I think it's more about strengthening the coalition of the willing, the ones that are really the ones that are living close to the sea, that really want see that there is an immediate need of action, because they are the ones that are mostly concerned, because they are the ones that are living there, and making that really a strong coalition, making that really bring that all together. And I think this is something that can be done already with the existing, and the UN Decade can serve as a kind of a to bring in these crystallization points and making these connections, and I think that is important, because otherwise a lot of the programs, they're great, but it's often, and we have seen that when you were listening into the Ocean Decade laboratories, a lot of the people that we have seen, we know each other. So we don't need yet another structure to be able to talk to each other, but I think it's these local and regional initiatives that needs to be brought up, and they need to become visible and to get a voice here. I think that's important. Thank you.
Thank you. So yes, I think what you're saying is the UN Decade really needs to persist, of course, for the next 100 years in order to continue those linkages between and amongst the very local projects. Antje, if I may, I would like to take us out to the open ocean, the deep seas, and the ocean beyond national jurisdiction. Given all of your expertise, what would you actually recommend in terms of a science policy interface process for this emerging biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction agreement, and how can it build on existing assessment processes, and where does it need to go further?
Yeah, that has so many levels of considerations, because on the one hand, we all know that this dream of protecting our common global goods like the atmosphere and the high seas, water as a resource and all of that, that seems so logical that we do that as a humanity, because we've always been migrating as humans. It's just amazing what a type of migrating animal we are through Earth's history and through all of the crises of mankind. But on the other hand, we all know that we just don't live in a world that cherishes and has yet the economic concept that has the full value chains for global goods, right? We are still fighting for the CO2 tax to protect our atmosphere, while really thousands and millions of people are dying from bad air. And so to really put a full value chain now to the deep sea, to this immense genetic reservoir of Earth that has all of that life, that when I see it in my submersible, I just had an encounter with a calmar that I'm just remembering because it was like an alien encounter, you know? So we have this life that we don't know, we barely have contact to it, but we're destroying it in great parts. That means creating a full new ethical perspective on the value of life that has no immediate economic return to humans. Because we cannot say if some deep sea species go extinct, we have bad air or we lose CO2 fixation as we do now for our forests and the water we want to drink. It is a common good. It is a type of life resource that goes on the timescale of millions of years for our spaceship Earth. And so to put that into perspective and to have an argument why we need to protect the seafloor, all the life in it, why we cannot risk it, why we have to take the precautionary principle but still allow science, that is almost the ethical, philosophical discussion we lead as one humanity. We have to lead as one humanity because it's on that scale. And so I'm wondering how to do that right. I think to go much beyond the current policy discussions and to make it such a big discussion of humanity is one perspective that we actually need. We need to complement the BBNG process with a much broader discussion of what is the intrinsic value of nature and life. That is missing.
Something to discuss on our mission to Antarctica. That was trying to bring all the policies and perspectives into some place that is so remote but yet so wondrous is indeed a huge challenge. And I'm wondering how and whether the UN Decade of Ocean Science could actually try to convene such a discussion. Because truly it does pull in the best of all of our types of knowledge, going to the ethical and moral dilemmas that we have as a human species, as one migratory species on this planet. Yeah. David, I'm curious about your perspectives on this as a very coastal person, but who has also been involved in many of these more remote processes. Where are you seeing us going in terms of science architecture to deliver a global perspective on our ocean planet? You are still muted.
Yes, thank you. I was finding my buttons. Yeah, so I do listen with great interest to these high seas discussions and what Ante just said, because I have kept a strong focus in coastal areas because working on coral reefs and the huge, immense need of people as well in coastal areas around the world. But I really do see in this architecture of science and policy and science and society that this networked model that we've talked about, I think is really important. I think the internet and digital communications enable that in a way that was just not possible even 4, 5, 10 years ago. And of course, with the COVID pandemic experience, we really realized how much we can do online. And so really taking that to the next level so that we can really empower people in a local place, seeing common vision with people in another local place and joining together, so their voice is stronger, their knowledge is really comes to the fore and is validated, and we can work out how to blend their knowledge with the science and the policy and decision-making frameworks that have been designed. And I think really getting to that place is really the future of the sort of decision-making that I see we need to have in coral reef type of areas. We hear, I dabble a little bit in the literature on governance, and we hear sort of this term polycentric governance coming out more and more. And I think that idea that you can enable local community leaders and representatives and local government and national government and UN or international sort of leaders communicate in a common platform so that you can see the issues that are important to them sort of teleconnected across those levels. I think the SDGs enable us to do that. They give us a common language that facilitates that process. And so I think that's something that, and I'm sure the Ocean Decade will really help that happen, because that's very much in the DNA of what the Ocean Decade is trying to do in the 8 years moving forward, 8.5 years as we have time to build this together.
Well, thank you. I think we should turn back the clock to 2020 so we can relive these past 2 years, because it has started way too quickly. But I think that's fascinating. I mean, we need the teleconnection, but we also need the common language and the common values and the common goals. And that gets back to what Jorn said about the common questions. You know, what is the question is the question. And, you know, how do we help to formulate that in a way that will bring in the various stakeholders to want to share their information, their data and perspectives, and also to listen. Jorn, Antje, and David, I think we're going to have to transition soon to the audience, but if you'd like to give some comments on that before we bring in wider questions that I hope are steamrolling in. Jorn, please, and then Antje.
Yeah, thank you very much, Christina. And I was actually thinking about this challenge of, you know, finding the common questions. And I mean, one of the challenges is, I think, that we tend to think that there are overarching common questions. And there might be some on a very global level, but a lot of the questions are very, you know, local, and they're very specific. And I think that another thing that the decade can actually help us is in understanding the diversity of the communities, the scientific community. We have been talking about different knowledge sources and bringing knowledge together. And we have been talking about reaching out to local communities, to indigenous communities, you know, bringing that knowledge in, the relevant knowledge. And there are a lot of challenges in that. And I have been working for a couple of years with local communities, and I'm currently working on a project that is specifically looking into working with local communities and indigenous communities to understand what are their perspectives, what are not only what is the knowledge, but also what are their perspectives, what are their values, because they determine also the kind of question that they are asking, and we need to understand. And you talked about the common language. Maybe we don't necessarily need a common language, but we need to have a common understanding of the different languages and the different perspectives, rather than, you know, always coming to one. And I think that was something that I also in the word cloud found. One of the most difficult words is integration, because integration often means that something is more dominant than the other. So if you start integrating, then I mean, often you have a tendency of something taking over. And I think that is a danger, and we need to be really humble and, you know, take a step back and, you know, look at the multitude of different perspectives and values. And I think this is where I think the point about bringing these local initiatives and activities, you know, together and having that dialogue is really valuable. And I think this is exactly something that we could do through the existing structures. Just one example, ICs, traditionally, of course, scientific work that has been done in all the expert groups. We started now in one of the expert groups to specifically consider how can we bring in indigenous communities, and how can we bring in not only the knowledge but also the perspectives, the values of these communities. And I think this is something that we need to work on more, and also bring that into these fora for a specific purpose. And we are talking about integrated assessments, and how can we bring in this multitude of knowledge and perspectives. And I think this is something that we also now looking more and more on the level of the World Ocean Assessment. You know, how can we really do that if you have this kind of very high level process? Because often what you get is high level representatives of communities rather than the voice of the communities themselves. And David can probably speak to that as well. And IPIS has you know, already set up groups that are specifically looking into how to work with indigenous communities to really understand how that can be best done. And I think this is important that we not necessarily come to a kind of a common, we need to go into the same direction, but we don't need to do that with the same languages, with the same approaches necessarily. Thank you.
But in many ways, yes, climate change is the real leveler, although it will also have very unequal effects on people and animals and other ocean ecosystems. Antje, please share your thoughts.
Yeah, so thinking about the purpose of assessment, one where I find we really need to work on common indicators and language and ideas is really the restoration part. So also for the oceans, the facts are there. We have already lost so much. You know the story of the great whales, like the blue whale. We cannot be satisfied with the number of populations. There are so many whale species, marine mammals threatened by the warming, by the melting of the Arctic ice and much more. So for restoration, to really have a ocean knowledge, shared human ocean knowledge of restoration from the coasts to the high seas, we need an assessment that works towards that. That means we need some common indicators. We need a decision. What is our reference basis? What do we actually want? What are the key indicator species to which we orient ourselves? Because that has been a helpful concept on land. Predator species, for example, and that is to me the most urgent because we're losing at a pace, we're losing space in the ocean at a pace that is unimaginable, and why some of us scientists make propositions of how macroalgae, kelp beds and mangroves will save CO2 from the atmosphere. The real fact is we are losing them as fast or even faster than rainforest that is deforested. So for me, we need that common language that tells us what's our reference and how can anyone as small and as big as possible work towards the goal of restoring ocean ecosystems so that we have a healthy oceans that we have already partially lost. It is not there yet, that project, but we need it. And so that would be my response to the ultimate goal of an assessment and negotiations about transparent communication of the riches that every nation has and we all have in the sea.
Wow, so we need an interface between the decade of ocean science and the decade of restoration, and really try to think how we can frame our concepts and our science and our policymaker with the goal of actually restoring ocean health, because it has been degraded in so many places, but also maintaining it where it may theoretically exist. We're starting to run out of time, but I could go on for hours. I would like to give you all a chance to sort of contemplate again, based on what we have heard, what are you thinking in terms of the science architecture that we need to deliver relevant science to policy at whichever level you prefer, global, regional, local. I think it would be nice to think of both the horizontal connections as well as the global to local connections. Jorn, Antje, then David, please.
Maybe I give the word to David first.
Okay, please, David. You were looking away from me.
Yeah, you put me on the spot there. No, so I think I've already touched on this a little bit, sort of in this connection from the global to the regional, national, and local, and these horizontal connections as well are really important. I think in the end, so I was listening very intently to what Jorn and Antje just said, and I think one of the terms that I come back to more and more now, and dealing with the IPBES process, it's very strong, and the Earth Commission that I'm involved in is equity, and the real need we have to really address equity, because we live in a very unequal world. And I think what that means in the context that we're talking about around ocean information and science, dealing with problems, with restoration, is really listening to and understanding different people's perspectives and needs and acknowledging and addressing those. And I think the communication, the science communication to do that can really help to democratize that and really listen to different perspectives. So I think in terms of this sort of network structures that you asked about, really that sense of equity and each voice being heard in that process is very important while we work towards common goals and deal with very difficult questions and decisions that we have to make about the trade-offs that we have to face.
That's just on the ocean equity issue. There's been a lot of work on to sort of look at who is actually profiting from the ocean right now, and how do we better just make sure that those benefits are more equitably distributed. And I think that needs to come in terms of how you are informing policymaking going forward. How do we more equalize the playing field between those who are able to benefit now and those who need to continue to benefit in the future at very different scales? David.
Yes, absolutely, Christina. But I would say that's no different from the more general question of who has benefited from, natural resource use and global processes over hundreds of years. It's a dynamic that we as the human species and our different societies have not addressed very well. But now at the edge of the Anthropocene and planetary boundaries, and no more space to move to or to extract from, we really need to address that question very quickly and deeply, and really take the hard decisions we do need to make to not damage things further.
That's a good segue to Antje. Make the hard decisions, please.
And here, the focus is much, of course, here on data and on all of the sharing of what is already done. But I would like to put the focus once more on the presence in sea, at the coasts, everywhere. And so there is, of course, at the coast, we can engage many more people. It is a tradition, of course, for all of the people living in the sea and on the sea to know their surroundings. And we've heard about the app, for example, and many ideas how we can make tourists part of a global observation system, extreme sports sailors. I'm here with Arvid Fuchs in Monaco. He reports on his new missions where they put sensors on the ships. So it is an increasing engagement of society to know the oceans and to feel the pulse of the oceans. But then there are these regions, especially the polar regions, the high seas, the deep seas, where just very few nations have the infrastructure, and they struggle about the future of their infrastructures. Nothing is to be taken for granted. And the polar ambassador of France, Olivier Boisvaux-Davois, has just made a new polar strategy that speaks about this problem, that we have not the means yet to have a reliable ocean infrastructure for knowledge that we want to share, for knowing and valuing biodiversity. So I have to raise that again. I know that some people think enough research, time to act, and we know enough, but it is actually not true for the oceans. There are so many mysteries, so many discoveries to be made. And I'm a big defender of having a right and fair share of presence at sea for the purpose of knowing the oceans. That is important for our lives and survival.
Powerful, yes. Jorn, please.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Just to pick up on the last point, Antje, I think that's a really, really good point. I mean, we often say we do have enough knowledge and decisions will be made anyways. I mean, even in the complete absence of knowledge, a decision will be made. And I think this is important because it's not necessarily about the decision itself, it's about the quality of the decision. And I think both Antje and David said that earlier. It's about the quality of a decision that has been taken. With respect to the network, I mean, that the challenge I see is, and I can repeat that we already start seeing a network building up and more of the local and initiatives and activities being lifted up and being connected to the higher up structures. The challenge is, of course, that we are talking about a relatively complex network of things, and I think one help there might be some, and not only necessarily a common global interest, but some more common interest that is more, that is closer to where the people are. And I'm saying that again, in alluding to the fact that we have been talking about ocean literacy and bringing the knowledge of the ocean to the people. And one of the issues is that if it's too far away, I mean, it's very difficult for the people to relate to. And this is where I think the nexus assessment of IPIS is bringing the topics of food and water, health together, where you make the link between your immediate food and health with something that is further away, that is actually that you would never have thought about. And this is where we need to make this complexity more visible and say, okay, so it is relevant, and it's relevant because of. And I think this is something where this network can help in identifying these different topics and bring that together and make it more visible, and creating these images. I mean, creating, and I mean, I haven't been really talking about games, and I mean, that would be probably another hour to talk about that, but, you know, also use tools to make the knowledge more accessible in a way that they are being consumed. I mean, that is also something that is, I think, very, very, very important. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm seeing something on the temperature in the deep ocean and the salinity of the upper ocean and its impact on rainfall in remote countries. I think that could be quite fascinating. So thank you so much for this vibrant discussion. I see we are being joined by Monica Jones. That was if I can just help with this transition. I think we're looking at an Internet of Things, Internet of the metadatabase, the meta communications infrastructures that we now have the luxury of having via the web, via satellite and Internet submarine cables, to actually start bringing all of these things together, to bring us here together today to talk about these critical issues. And I think we need to be looking globally at, you know, what sort of infrastructure do we need to continue that data, science, and transfer to policymakers, because I think, as you said, decisions are being made even in the absence of critical knowledge and information. So that the time is right to start addressing these issues. How do we strengthen the existing science to knowledge to society infrastructures? And we'll look forward to figuring out how together we can do that or improve it through the UN Decade of Ocean Science. Over to you, Monica. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Christina, and obviously also to the panel. And what you just mentioned, picking up from Jörn, saying decisions will be made even in the absence of knowledge. I actually, for a moment, sort of cringed because I thought, oh my God, that's a really scary thought. And we have to make sure that there is enough knowledge, enough information for those who make those decisions. Maybe we don't have any questions, but there was one comment in the chat where I just share with you. It's referring to something that you actually, Christina, and the panelists have also been referring to, the idea of having an ocean station like the ISS, the International Space Station, which would be a brilliant idea. And when Antje was sharing with us her experience, her encounter with a calmar, and likening it to an encounter with an alien, I immediately thought, yeah, you know, we as humans, we're happy to spend a lot of money and pay a lot of attention, also in media coverage and politicians, when it comes to exploring space, which is wonderful. I can relate to that. But we know so little about the ocean, and for some reason, ocean science is not on eye level here. And I had to think of a word which may not be the right one for this discussion, but perhaps for the next. You know, maybe we don't only need a science architecture in order to relate relevant data to decision makers and policy makers, but maybe we need something like a lobby, because space science certainly has one. Else all the funding and all the financing would not be available. But as I just mentioned, that is a topic for another discussion. Thank you so much for this panel right now, and all the best for the work you're doing, the wonderful work you're doing. And with that, I have to say, because I know that Sebastian, who is standing next to me, actually told me that I have a question, but we didn't have time anymore, so we'll have to pick up another time. But I think that was a really great culmination, synthesis, as we said earlier, to this 3-day laboratory. And Sebastian, as this one is coming to a close, I'd love to hear your key takeaways.
Yeah, indeed, Monica. And also from my side, first of all, thanks a lot, Antje, Christina, David, and Jörn. This has been really a very exciting discussion, and I think an excellent synthesis after these 3 days. And I think this is not only a conversation that will stop here, but I think a conversation that will carry on. A lot has, I think, come out of these debates that will be carried on. We will most likely, hopefully see each other end of June, early July in Lisbon at the UN Ocean Decade, where a lot of focus will be given to exactly this question: how science can be communicated different, how science, how knowledge can be transferred into action. And I think I won't give justice to this rich discussion, but I still try to summarize what my key messages were from these 5 days. And I think there was a very strong view among all the panelists and also our participants that we need a strengthened, a more effective science policy interface. And we have asked you on the first day what our views are, what our participants think. Do we need a new science policy interface? Do we carry on with the system that we have? Or do we try to improve the different linkages and the different systems that we have? And we want to ask you now again to really answer this question. And you have these 3 options. And we are really curious to see if this has changed. While you are voting, I will summarize my other points, and these were that there is a clear view that we need a step change also in this UN decade in ocean science capacities, and that includes different instruments like data platforms, like tools for citizen science. We have seen these exciting apps, those sort of instruments, also a digital twin for the ocean. They will definitely improve the way how we observe, how we monitor, and then hopefully how also we assess the data. And reference to this ISS have been made quite a few. We need to develop new ways how we create our knowledge. These ways have to be inclusive, they have to be engaging, and equity is a key point here when we derive conclusions from the knowledge. So it has to be really done in a way that involves people at the local level, at the regional level, and at the national level. We need to also look into the way how we collaborate, and Antje has made this nice suggestion that we need a mission of humankind for Antarctica, and this is exactly a type of imaginative ideas that we need to put out. We have to be concrete, we have to use the UN decade to really communicate the challenge that we are faced with in a way that it grasps people's imagination, and we need to, of course, work across sectors in that regard, involve stakeholders from different levels, and also for the science itself, it means that we work across scientific disciplines, from natural science, social science, the humanities, and so forth. And last but not least, communication is the one of the key messages. We need to have clear and easy understandable messages. So strengthen science society policy interfaces, a step change in ocean science capacities. We need to develop new ways to create our knowledge. We need to improve collaboration and communication. So with that, I hand back to you, Monica.
Yeah, I was just wondering if there should be then another point on that list, whether we do need a new interface, or maybe we should just improve those that we have, because that is, I think, the key question there. I doubt that there'll be a lot of people deciding that basically the existing interfaces are fine. And I can definitely detect a slight change to the core event, where it was almost 50-50. And now it's much clearer that we need a new ocean science policy interface. What do you make of that? Is that a surprise?
It's not a big surprise, but it's interesting to see, of course, the discussion perhaps have changed perceptions. But what I think is most impressive is really the very, very clear picture that what we have is not good enough, and it really is not responding to the urgency.
All right. Well, and it keeps changing again. We better stop now because it'll keep going back and forth. But Sebastian, thank you so much. I mean, 3 days, gone like this. And I know there was a lot of preparation also, and Katrina, of course, before this laboratory. And now it's already time to move on to the next. Before we do, though, however, let me just inform you that, of course, all the documents, if made available, will be available and uploaded on the Ocean Decade website very, very shortly. The same goes for the videos of both the core event and this wrap-up, which will be on the Ocean Decade YouTube channel. And last but not least, out of the 22 satellite activities of this laboratory, there's one more coming up, the Ocean Flag, hosted by the Sustainable Fashion Workshop with Runa Ray, and that is starting at 6:30 p.m. Central European Time. And with that, we say goodbye to the 6th Ocean Decade Laboratory and Accessible Ocean, and say hello to the next and actually the final Ocean Decade Laboratory, which is coming up shortly, a productive ocean. And for that, I welcome very much the chairs of that lab, Professor Reinhold Hanel, head of the Thunen Institute of Fisheries Ecology in Bremerhaven in Germany, and Dr. Anna Jöborn, the CEO of the Swedish Foundation for Strategic Environmental Research. Hello to both of you, and I believe you can give us something like a teaser of what's coming up in this next laboratory.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Monica. Thanks a lot for having us with you at the end of these amazing 3 days. It was a challenge for us to come up with this last laboratory, but for sure it is the last but not the least laboratory. And it is one of the most important from our point of view. So we heard a lot in the last row of laboratories about about the challenges, how to reach a healthy, a clean, and also a safe ocean. But these challenges were often linked to an excessive use of the ocean. However, the ocean is, of course, of crucial importance for the livelihoods of millions of people, and of course, also for the coming generations. So in the coming decades, a growing human population is hopefully at least associated with higher prosperity. And also there is an envisaged energy transition that will demand even more from the ocean. So what we'll try to focus on in our laboratory is how to have better management. And also, I mean, it has been mentioned here that the science policy interface is very important. And especially for a productive ocean, for the use of the ocean, the management is very much dependent on the science policy interface. So this laboratory will present and discuss the role of the ocean, the role the ocean can have in providing food, energy, transportation routes, and also raw materials into the future, but also while remaining cultural and spiritual values. So this is the basic points we want to come up with, and hopefully we can have a very good start into the Ocean Decade with new ideas, with new discussions on a more sustainable, a more responsible use of a productive ocean. Anna.
Oh, we can't hear you, Anna. Your microphone seems to be muted.
Now?
Yes.
You can hear me. Yes. Good. Thank you, Reinhold, and thank you, Monica. Let me start with just thank you all for such an inspiring laboratory, and we will continue with the conversation during the next lab. So we are happy to have a number of interesting satellite activities that would take place all around the globe, starting the 31st of May and ending the 2nd of June. And at the core event, the 31st of May, we have a number of excellent speakers representing different perspectives on sustainable, equitable, and productive ocean. So as Reinhold mentioned, you will get inspirational examples of collaboration. It's actually focusing on collaboration, and especially collaboration between researchers and different ocean actors, and topics such as rebuilding wild fish stocks, harvesting seaweed, ensuring transparent fisheries management, providing ocean-based wind energy, working together with local and indigenous communities for a sustainable productive ocean, and tourism. So you will be able to be invited to discuss the challenges also that we face. We are going to discuss climate change and plastic pollution, for example, and how research can be part of providing the information and finding solutions. So I agree with all of you. I think science has an important role in both questioning, supporting society with knowledge and new ideas. So we think there is a great potential for collaboration in different ways, and I welcome you all to the next lab. See you then.
Indeed, and the next lab, of course, is taking place on May the 31st to June the 2nd, so everybody out there should pencil that down already. And just to tell you both, because Reinhold and Anna, I'm looking forward to meeting you then, and thank you also so much for your comments on this particular lab right now. The verdict on that last poll is far from out and over. It's like a scale balancing back and forth, changing continuously, but this is also part and parcel of the discussion that is ongoing with the next ocean laboratory, A Productive Ocean. So see you all, hopefully healthy and well, in less than 3 weeks' time. Until then, have a good time.